What if the most powerful part of a product is literally not knowing what you're actually buying? Today, we are going to completely deconstruct a massive cultural and financial phenomenon that, on the surface, looks completely innocent. We're talking about the world of blind boxes. You know, those sealed, mysterious little packages containing collectible figures like Labubus or Sunny Angels. But underneath all that cute pastel aesthetics lies a highly sophisticated business model, one that's built around mystery, scarcity, and some of the absolute strongest psychological triggers in modern consumer culture. So let's dive into this explainer and see what's really going on. To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this phenomenon, just look at this number. PopMart, which is the giant company behind the viral Labubu figures, generated over $5 billion in revenue in 2025 alone. $5 billion! That is a staggering figure for a company selling what are, let's be honest, essentially just small vinyl and plush toys. Their revenue soared 185% year over year. So this isn't just some fleeting toy craze. It is an absolute economic powerhouse. And what's even more fascinating for us analyzing this space is this metric right here, 70%. Since the whole Labubu trend exploded, PopMart's gross margins have expanded to around 70%. That kind of pricing power is just incredible. By vertically integrating and controlling their own intellectual property, they managed to turn really inexpensive plastic and plush materials into these high-margin, almost luxury-like assets. But how exactly do they do it? Which leads us to the central question of this whole explainer. Why are adults spending thousands of dollars on plastic? To figure this out, we have to completely shift our perspective. We aren't just looking at simple toys here. We are looking at highly engineered consumer psychology. And to answer this question, we actually need to step away from the balance sheet for a minute and look directly inside the human brain. That brings us to section 1, the core engine, behavioral neuroscience. To truly understand why this business model is so incredibly effective, we need to look at the underlying mechanics of addiction. The foundation of it all is something called variable ratio reinforcement. It's a psychological mechanism where a reward is given unpredictably, causing a highly persistent pattern of behavior. Guys, this is the exact same behavioral neuroscience that powers slot machines in casinos. When you buy a blind box, you don't know which figure you're getting. You might pull a totally common one, or you might hit the jackpot and get a rare secret figure. Because the reward is completely uncertain, it trains your nervous system to just keep going, making it incredibly difficult to walk away. So how does this addiction loop actually play out in our brains? Well, it starts with curiosity, followed by dopamine anticipation. Now, here is an absolutely mind-blowing fact from behavioral researchers. The biggest dopamine spike doesn't actually come when you get the item you want. It happens right before you open the box. The brain literally cares more about the prediction of the reward than the actual reward itself. Then comes the reveal. Once you know what's inside, there is an immediate dopamine drop. And that decline, that feeling of, oh, that's it? That's what pushes the brain directly into step 5, the chase. You are compelled to buy just one more box to get that anticipatory high back. And you know, this isn't just clinical theory. Let's ground this data with a real-world perspective. Dane and Wen, a 27-year-old consumer who spent $4,000 on Labobus in just 8 months, said this: "Honestly, that's gambling. I'm going to say it flat out, it's straight gambling." She realized she was caught in a vicious cycle, chasing that little sweet treat for a quick fix of dopamine just to regulate her mood. For a lot of people, this isn't a fun toy loop. It's a self-soothing loop that becomes incredibly, incredibly hard to break. A huge part of why it's so hard to stop comes down to a classic cognitive trap: the gambler's fallacy. This is the false belief that previous outcomes somehow affect future probabilities. In the blind box world, if you pull several common figures in a row, your brain tricks you into assuming that a rare secret figure is somehow due to appear in your next box. But actually, scratch that. The odds literally never change. Every single box is a hard reset. This cognitive bias traps collectors in a cycle of compensatory consumption and irrational spending, where they just keep buying more to make up for the disappointment of the previous boxes. Let's move on to section 2, the multiplier, engineering artificial scarcity. These companies essentially pour gasoline on this psychological fire by engineering massive FOMO. Just consider the sheer scale of the price inflation we're seeing. A standard blind box retails for about $15 to $28. But companies intentionally engineer extreme artificial scarcity. A secret or hidden figure is typically placed in just one out of 144 boxes. Because of that scarcity, that same exact little piece of vinyl suddenly commands $300 to $900 on the secondary market. And ultra-rare art pieces, they can auction for over $170,000. No joke. This perceived investment value acts as a massive justification for consumers to just keep spending. But to reach billions in revenue, you need a megaphone. And today, that megaphone is social media. We're talking TikTok's Unbox With Me culture, algorithmically amplified emotional reactions, high-pressure live box breaks, and massive celebrity endorsements like Lisa from Blackpink showing off her Labubu collection. This acts as an organic marketing engine, turning the solitary act of buying into a viral, FOMO-inducing community event. Every unboxing video gives the viewer a vicarious hit of dopamine. You see someone else pull a rare figure, you get social proof that winning is actually possible, and you instantly want to join the in crowd. Now, from a financial analyst perspective, this viral demand needs friction-free distribution to really capitalize on the hype. While physical specialty stores account for 29% of the global market, online stores are the dominant channel at nearly 39%. E-commerce allows for the rapid, massive scaling of this impulse-driven business. Brands even offer digital blind box mechanics now, where you can open a box on your phone app before the physical product is even shipped to your house. It is immediate, totally frictionless gratification. Which brings us to Section 3, the dark side, the systemic risks of the surprise economy. There is a very real, heavy human cost to all of this gamification, lurking right beneath that cute, colorful branding. Just listen to Jess, a 28-year-old consumer. She said, "My buyer's guilt is insane. It's $1,300 on trash." She found herself buying plushies she didn't even like just for the thrill of the unboxing itself. This perfectly illustrates the devastating financial strain and intense buyer's remorse experienced by addicted consumers. When that dopamine finally drops, reality sets in, and the financial and emotional damage is often really severe. It's honestly like a split reality. On the surface, you see an innocent facade of cute, collectible vinyl figures, harmless community bonding, and super accessible $15 price points. But the underlying reality? It's a deeply predatory ecosystem. We see aggressive scalper bots buying up limited inventory in literal milliseconds, widespread counterfeit products, hilariously but sadly known as lafufus, flooding the market, and intense psychological distress tied to mounting credit card debt. And the clinical community is officially raising red flags here. Researchers warn this is way more than just a passing toy craze. The blind box model has been associated with exacerbating hoarding disorder tendencies, where collectors become highly protective of their possessions. Studies have found correlations between randomized product purchasing and severe psychological distress, and it is a documented pathway to problem gambling later in life. Plus, there's this concept of small payment paralysis, which masks massive debt. Spending $15 feels completely harmless, right? Until you realize you've done it 100 times in a single month. Because of these systemic risks, we are seeing looming regulatory crackdowns worldwide. Governments are absolutely waking up to the gamblification of consumer goods. China's State Administration for Market Regulation has actually straight up banned the sale of blind boxes to children under 8 and mandated public probability disclosures. There are also growing calls globally for spending limits and pity mechanics, where a consumer is guaranteed the item they want after a certain number of pulls. Even the U.S. Federal Trade Commission is heavily scrutinizing the space over child-directed marketing via influencers. So where does all this leave us? Section 4, the resolution, the future of gamified retail. To understand what this phenomenon means for the broader landscape of modern commerce, just consider these projections. Despite the regulatory scrutiny and the obvious psychological toll, the global blind box market was valued at $6.8 billion in 2025, and it is projected to absolutely explode to $17.4 billion by 2034. So yeah, this highly engineered business model isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It is aggressively expanding into new demographics, new intellectual properties, and even integrating with digital NFTs and augmented reality. Gamified retail is quickly becoming the new standard. Which brings us to a somewhat chilling final thought for this explainer. The real product is not always the toy inside the box. Sometimes the real product is the feeling of opening it. We are no longer just buying physical objects in the modern economy. We are purchasing uncertainty, dopamine, identity, and the thrill of the chase. And as long as our human neuroscience craves that next surprise, the business of hype will absolutely continue to thrive. So, next time you're tempted to buy a mystery box, think carefully about what's really driving your purchase. Thanks for joining me on this one, and I'll see you next time.